The alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., and I was already reaching for it before the sound could wake Marcus. 3 years of this routine had trained my body to move like a ghost in the early morning darkness. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet finding the cold hardwood floor of our Chicago apartment, and padded to the kitchen where another day of invisible labor awaited. Coffee first. Always coffee first. The machine hummed to life as I opened the laptop on the kitchen counter, squinting at the spreadsheet that had become my nemesis. Our finances stared back at me in neat columns of red and black, mostly red. Marcus's freelance graphic design work had been sporadic lately, which meant my salary from the marketing firm was carrying us both. Again, the shower started running upstairs. 20 minutes, maybe 25, if he was feeling particularly ambitious about his hair routine. That gave me time to review his portfolio submissions from last night, fix the typos in his cover letters, and update his LinkedIn profile. I'd been doing this for him every morning for the past 6 months. Ever since he'd complained that he wasn't good with words and needed my help to make him sound professional. My phone buzzed. A text from my boss, Jennifer. Great work on the Morrison campaign yesterday. The client wants to meet with you specifically next week. This could be big, Sarah. I smiled despite myself screenshotting the message before it could disappear into the endless scroll of notifications. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what big might mean. A promotion, creative director, maybe even the chance to pitch my own ideas instead of polishing everyone else's vision, until it sparkled. Sarah. Marcus's voice boomed from upstairs. Where's my gray shirt? The good one? The good one was in the laundry basket, wrinkled and coffee-stained from 3 days ago. I'd meant to wash it, but between working late on the Peterson account, and grocery shopping and cooking dinner and paying bills and researching health insurance options because ours was expiring, laundry had somehow slipped through the cracks. Coming? I called back, abandoning his portfolio to sprint upstairs. The iron was cold, but I plugged it in anyway, knowing it would take at least 5 minutes to heat up. 5 minutes we didn't have. Marcus stood in front of our closet wearing only boxer shorts and an expression of profound irritation. At 32, he still had the lean build that had attracted me in college, but the easy smile I'd fallen in love with had been replaced by a permanent furrow between his eyebrows. Stress, he called it. The pressure of being an artist in a world that didn't understand creativity. Why isn't it clean? He asked, holding up the gray shirt like evidence in a criminal trial. I'm sorry, I'll iron it right now. The iron just needs a minute to heat up. I have that interview at 11. You know how important this is? I did know. CreateSpace, the trendy advertising agency downtown, was looking for a senior designer. It was exactly the kind of job Marcus had been dreaming about: creative freedom, good pay, respect from his peers. He'd been talking about it for weeks, sketching out ideas for his presentation, practicing his pitch in the mirror. It'll be perfect, I assured him, testing the iron with a quick touch. Still cold. Tell me about your presentation again while I wait for this to heat up. His face brightened immediately. Marcus loved talking about his work, loved explaining his creative process and the deeper meaning behind his designs. I'd learned to listen with the right kind of attention, nodding at the appropriate moments, asking questions that made him feel brilliant. Everyone's doing these glossy, perfect campaigns, but what if we went the opposite direction? Raw, real, unfiltered. Like, imagine a coffee ad where the person actually spills the coffee, or a car commercial where they hit traffic. Life as it actually is. That's brilliant, I said, and meant it. Marcus was talented, I never doubted that. His designs had a raw energy that bigger agencies often lacked. He just needed someone to believe in him, to support him while he found his footing. The iron's ready. I pressed the shirt with practiced efficiency, smoothing out each wrinkle. While he continued explaining his vision, the fabric steamed under my hands, transforming from rumpled mess to crisp perfection. This was what I did: made things better, smoother, easier for everyone around me. It was my superpower, my curse. You're amazing, Marcus said, kissing the top of my head as I handed him the shirt. I don't know what I'd do without you. The words should have warmed me, but they landed with the hollow ring of habit. He said it often, usually when I'd just solved a problem he couldn't be bothered to handle himself. It was appreciation, I told myself, just not the kind that came with recognition or reciprocity. Downstairs, I packed his portfolio into the leather messenger bag I'd bought him for Christmas, along with copies of his resume which I'd written, business cards which I'd designed, and a printed list of talking points for the interview which I'd researched and compiled. His coffee was waiting in a travel mug, prepared exactly how he liked it: 2 sugars. Splash of cream, stirred counterclockwise because he claimed it tasted better that way. You've got this, I said, straightening his collar. Remember, they called you. They want to meet you. That means they're already interested, right? He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Authenticity, raw talent, vision for the future. Exactly. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door, pausing only to check his appearance in the hallway mirror. What time will you be home tonight? Probably around 7. I'm meeting with the Morrison people at 4, then I need to finish the quarterly reports? Cool. Maybe we can order Thai food. I'll probably be celebrating. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone with the morning light streaming through our living room windows. Our apartment was small but bright, with exposed brick walls and tall windows that had sold us on the place 3 years ago. Back then, it had felt like the beginning of something, our first home together. A launching pad for 2 careers and shared dreams. Now, it felt like a beautiful cage. I finished getting ready in the quiet, choosing clothes that were professional, but not too ambitious. A gray blazer, black pants, minimal jewelry. The mirror showed me a woman of 29 who looked older, tired around the eyes but still pretty in an understated way. My mother's cheekbones, my father's stubborn chin, and something entirely my own in the set of my shoulders, determination. Maybe, or just habit. The commute to downtown Chicago was 45 minutes by train. 45 minutes I used to scroll through industry news and respond to emails. My phone buzzed constantly, clients with questions, colleagues needing approvals, vendors following up on orders. Each notification was a small proof of my competence, evidence that people relied on me, trusted my judgment. The Morrison meeting went better than expected. Sarah Morrison, CEO of a boutique fitness chain, wanted to expand into digital marketing, and she'd specifically requested me after seeing my work on a similar campaign. We talked for over an hour about brand identity, target demographics, and the story she wanted to tell about her business. You really get it, she said as we wrapped up. Most agencies want to put us in a box, either we're hardcore fitness or boutique luxury, but never both. You see the nuance. Nuance. The word stuck with me as I walked back to the office. When had anyone ever noticed my ability to see nuance? In 5 years at Brennan & Associates, I'd become known as the reliable one, the problem solver, the person who could take any mess and turn it into something presentable. But nuance, real ideas, not just execution of someone else's vision. What if we showed the transition, the moment when someone stops seeing fitness as punishment and starts seeing it as self-care? The vulnerability of trying something new, the community that forms around shared struggle, the quiet confidence that comes from keeping promises to yourself. I was deep in the flow when my phone rang. Marcus, calling from his car. How did it go? I asked, though his tone had already given me the answer. They went with someone else. Someone with more agency experience, whatever that means. Apparently, freelance work doesn't count the same way. My heart sank for him, but also for us. Another rejection meant another month of tight finances. Another month of my salary stretching to cover 2 people's worth of expenses. I'm sorry, I said. That's their loss. Your portfolio was incredible. Was it though? His voice carried the familiar edge of self-doubt that appeared after every rejection. Maybe I'm kidding myself. Maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. You are good? You're talented and creative, and then why can't I get hired anywhere? Why am I 32 and still living off my girlfriend's paycheck? The word living hit me wrong. Not supported by or temporarily relying on, but living off. As if I were a trust fund rather than a person with my own dreams and ambitions. It's a tough market, I said instead. The right opportunity will come along. Yeah, maybe. He sighed heavily. Listen, I'm going to grab drinks with Jake. He knows some people at a startup downtown. Maybe I can make some connections. Jake was Marcus's college roommate, a guy who worked in tech and had the kind of effortless networking ability that made opportunities seem to fall from the sky. I liked Jake well enough, but their networking sessions usually involved expensive cocktails and late nights that left Marcus hungover and broke. That sounds good, I lied. I'll see you at home. Actually, you know what? Order Thai food anyway. I'll probably need comfort food when I get back. After he hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen, the Morrison campaign ideas blinking at me like accusations. When was the last time Marcus had asked about my work? When had he ever said, "How did it go?" About one of my meetings or projects, or small victories? The answer came too quickly. Never. That evening, I ate pad thai alone while watching the news. My laptop opened beside me as I refined the Morrison pitch. The apartment felt different without Marcus's restless energy filling it, quieter, but also somehow more spacious. I could think in complete thoughts, follow ideas to their natural conclusions without interruption. Around midnight, I heard his key in the lock. He stumbled slightly as he entered, not drunk, but certainly not sober. carrying the particular combination of defeat and false bravado that came from drowning disappointment in expensive whiskey. "You're still up," he said, collapsing. Onto the couch beside me, just finishing some work. "How was networking?" "Jake knows everyone. Seriously, everyone. There's this agency, Spectrum Creative. They're looking for a creative director. Jake's going to put in a word for me." I'd heard about Spectrum Creative. They were known for edgy campaigns and innovative digital strategies. They were also known for working their employees to the bone and burning through creative directors like tissue paper. "That's great," I said. "What would you want to do there?" "Lead a team, obviously. Set the creative vision for major campaigns. Finally get the recognition I deserve." Recognition he deserved. The phrase echoed in my head as I closed my laptop and headed to bed. Marcus had been chasing recognition his entire career, waiting for someone to notice his talent and hand him the success he felt was owed to him. But recognition wasn't something you could wait for. It was something you had to claim, earn, fight for. I lay awake long after Marcus fell asleep, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Sarah Morrison's words, "You really get it." When was the last time someone had said that to me about something that mattered? When had anyone seen past my efficiency and competence to recognize actual vision? The idea came to me in the space between sleep and waking, so clear and complete. It felt like remembering rather than imagining. Chicago Public Media ran a competition every year called Stories That Matter, local storytellers, competing to create short documentary films about issues affecting their communities. The winner got broadcast time on both radio and television, plus a $10,000 grant to develop their concept further. I'd been following the competition for 3 years, always meaning to enter but never quite finding the courage. This year's theme was Hidden Voices, stories about people whose contributions were overlooked or undervalued. The deadline was 6 weeks away. I knew exactly what story I wanted to tell. The Chicago Cultural Center buzzed with nervous energy on Saturday morning as dozens of filmmakers, journalists, and storytellers gathered for the Stories That Matter information session. I'd told Marcus I was meeting my college roommate Lisa for brunch, not technically a lie, since I was planning to call her afterward to catch up. But the deception sat heavy in my stomach as I found a seat in the ornate Preston Bradley Hall, surrounded by people who looked far more qualified than I felt. The competition coordinator, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Chen, explained the rules. With the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before, contestants would have access to basic equipment through the program but were responsible for their own subjects, locations, and creative vision. "This isn't just about technical skill," Diana emphasized, her voice echoing in the ornate room. "We're looking for stories that matter to our community, told by people who understand what they're talking about. Authenticity trumps polish. Every time, authenticity." Marcus's word from his failed interview, but hearing it here felt different. Not like a marketing buzzword, but like a challenge. I raised my hand before I could talk myself out of it. What if your story is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, but no one notices because the work is invisible? Diana's eyes lit up. "Can you be more specific?" "The people who keep everything running behind the scenes, like administrative assistants who basically run companies but never get credit, or spouses who support their partner's career at the expense of their own dreams, the invisible labor that makes everything else possible." Several heads around the room nodded. A woman in her 50s smiled at me with recognition. A younger man with a camera around his neck looked intrigued. "That's exactly what we're looking for," Diana said. "Stories that make visible what's usually invisible." Anyone else have questions? I spent the rest of the session taking notes and trying to contain the excitement building in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving toward something rather than just maintaining what already existed. The equipment checkout was surprisingly simpler: digital camera, wireless microphones, basic lighting kit, and editing software access. Diana handed me a laminated badge that read, "Sarah Chen Stories That Matter Participant," and suddenly it felt real. "First time doing documentary work?" she asked as I signed the equipment agreement. "First time doing any kind of filmmaking. Actually, I work in marketing, but I've always been interested in storytelling. Some of our best filmmakers come from other fields. You bring a different perspective, different skills. What's your story about?" I hesitated. I hadn't told anyone about my specific concept yet, hadn't even fully articulated it to myself. Women who've put their own ambitions on hold to support someone else's dreams? I want to explore what happens to those deferred dreams, and whether it's ever too late to reclaim them. Diana studied me with the kind of attention that made me feel simultaneously seen and exposed. Personal somewhat, the best stories usually are, "When do you think you'll start filming?" This week, I hope. I work full-time, so it'll have to be evenings and weekends. Most of our participants are juggling other commitments. The key is consistency, and if you can only work on it an hour a day, keep momentum going. Momentum is everything in a project like this. I left the cultural center with my equipment bag feeling like I was carrying possibility itself. The camera was heavier than I'd expected, professional in a way that made me want to live up to it. On the train home, I researched documentary techniques on my phone, watching YouTube tutorials about lighting and interviewing and the art of asking questions that revealed rather than concealed. Marcus was still asleep when I got home, one arm flung across my side of the bed, face peaceful in a way it never was when he was awake. I stored the equipment in the hall closet behind winter coats and extra linens, somewhere he'd never think to look. The next few days fell into a careful rhythm of secrecy. I'd wake up early to research potential interview subjects before work, spend lunch breaks watching documentary films on my phone, and stay late at the office to practice with the camera equipment. My colleagues probably thought I was working on some ambitious client project, which, in a way, I was. Finding subjects proved easier than I'd expected. A post on a women's professional network yielded dozens of responses from women eager to share their stories. Maria, a former lawyer who'd given up her practice to manage her husband's medical career and raise their 3 children. Janet Ann, artist who'd spent 20 years handling the business side of her partner's photography studio while her own paintings gathered dust. Rebecca, who deferred law school 4 times to support her husband through various career changes and startup attempts. Each conversation revealed layers of complexity I hadn't anticipated. These weren't simple stories of victimization, they were nuanced explorations of choice, compromise, and the complicated mathematics of love. Some women felt grateful for the opportunity to support their families. Others burned with quiet resentment. Most felt both things simultaneously, proud of their sacrifices but haunted by roads not taken. The hardest part was interviewing them without revealing too much of myself. Every story echoed my own experience in uncomfortable ways. The morning routine of solving someone else's problems, the invisible labor of emotional support, the gradual erosion of personal ambition under the weight of shared responsibility. The thing is, Rebecca said during our interview, sitting in her kitchen while her husband attended a networking event downtown, I convinced myself I was being selfless, noble even. But looking back, I think I was just scared. Scared of what? Of failing at my own dreams. It's easier to sacrifice them for someone else than to try and fall short. That way, you never have to find out if you were good enough. Her words haunted me as I rode the train home that night. Was that what I was doing? With Marcus using his needs as an excuse to avoid risking my own ambitions, the editing process consumed my evenings. After Marcus fell asleep, I'd creep to the kitchen table with my laptop and headphones, splicing together interviews and archival footage into something coherent. The software was more intuitive than I'd expected, but the creative decisions were agonizing. Which moments best captured the complexity of these women's experiences? How could I tell their stories without exploiting their vulnerability? 3 weeks into the project, I was making real progress. The documentary was taking shape around the theme of invisible architecture, all the unseen support that allows other people's dreams to flourish. I had compelling interviews, beautiful footage of Chicago neighborhoods where these women lived and worked, and a narrative structure that moved from sacrifice through recognition to reclamation. But I still needed something to tie it all together, a through line that connected these individual stories to a broader truth about women, work, and the way society values different kinds of contribution. The answer came to me during a particularly frustrating evening at home. Marcus was on the couch, complaining about another rejection letter while I cooked dinner, paid bills, and half listened to his theories about why the creative industry didn't appreciate authentic talent. "It's like I'm invisible," he said, scrolling through job listings on his phone. "I send out all these applications and it's like they disappear into a black hole. No one sees what I'm capable of. Invisible." The word hit me like electricity. "What if," I said carefully, "you tried a different approach? Instead of waiting for someone to notice you, what if you created something that made them notice?" He looked up from his phone, interested despite himself. "Like what?" "I don't know. A campaign that gets attention? A project that showcases your vision in a way they can't ignore. That takes time and money I don't have. I need to focus on getting hired, not on spec work that might not lead anywhere." But the idea had lodged itself in my brain. What if visibility wasn't something you waited for, but something you created? What if the women in my documentary, what if I stopped waiting for recognition and started demanding it? That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I made a decision. That would change everything. I was going to put myself in the documentary, not as the filmmaker, but as one of the subjects. I would tell my own story, the morning routines, the financial support, the emotional labor, the dreams deferred. I would interview myself with the same unflinching honesty I'd brought to the other women's stories. But more than that, I would document my own transformation. The documentary wouldn't just be about invisible women, it would show one woman making herself visible. The next evening, I set up the camera in our bedroom while Marcus was out with Jake again. The lighting was harsh, unflattering, but that felt appropriate. This wasn't about looking good, it was about telling the truth. "My name is Sarah Chen," I said to the camera, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm 29 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been invisible in my own life." I talked for 45 minutes, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. I described waking up early to manage Marcus's career while my own ambitions withered. I explained the financial calculations I ran every month, stretching my salary to cover 2 people's expenses. I talked about the loneliness of being useful but not seen, appreciated but not valued. "I love him," I said toward the end, surprising myself with the admission, "I do love him. But I've been loving him at my own expense, and I don't think he even notices. I've made myself so small, so accommodating, that there's barely anything left of who I used to be." The camera kept rolling as tears I didn't expect started falling. I want to know if it's too late, if I can find my way back to the person I was before I started disappearing myself for someone else's comfort. When I finally turned off the camera, the apartment felt different around me, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. I'd crossed a line not just by making the documentary, but by admitting to myself how unhappy I'd become. Over the next 2 weeks, I filmed myself in secret moments throughout our life together. Getting up early to iron his shirts, balancing our budget while he slept in, researching job opportunities for him while eating lunch alone at my desk. The footage was raw, unglamorous, but absolutely authentic. I also documented small acts of rebellion, spending an evening working on my Morrison campaign pitch instead of editing his portfolio, buying myself flowers with money from my personal account, calling in sick to work so I could film interviews instead of covering for Marcus when he was hungover from another networking session. Each small defiance felt monumental. The editing process became more complex as I wove my own story through the broader narrative. I was no longer just the filmmaker, I was the subject, the audience, and the protagonist of my own transformation. The documentary was becoming something more than I'd originally envisioned. Part social commentary, part personal confession, part manifesto. With 1 week left before the competition deadline, I had a rough cut that ran 18 minutes, 3 minutes too long. Every scene felt essential, but Diana's words echoed in my head. 15 minutes, exactly. No exceptions. I spent 3 sleepless nights cutting ruthlessly, maintaining the emotional arc while losing precious details. The final version clocked in at exactly 14 minutes and 58 seconds close, enough to perfect that it felt like destiny. The submission process was anticlimactic. Upload the video file, fill out a brief form, click submit. After 6 weeks of intensive work, my documentary was reduced to digital data floating somewhere in the internet, waiting to be judged by people I'd never met. I celebrated alone in the office, break room with a cup of coffee and a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. Whatever happened next, I'd done something entirely my own. I'd made something that mattered. Using skills I didn't know I possessed and courage I'd had to excavate from beneath years of self-doubt. Marcus never asked where I'd been all those evenings when I claimed to be working late. He never wondered why I seemed energized despite being tired, or why I'd started carrying myself differently, straighter with more purpose. His lack of curiosity about my inner life had once hurt. Now it felt like freedom. The notification came 3 weeks later while I was in a client meeting. An email from Diana Chen with the subject line, "Stories That Matter, Semi-Finalist Notification." My hands shook as I opened it. "Congratulations! Your submission in Visible Architecture has been selected as one of 12 semi-finalists for this year's Stories That Matter competition. The semi-finalist screenings will be held at the Chicago Theater on November 15th, with the final winner announced that evening. Your film will be broadcast on Chicago Public Media, regardless of final placement, scheduled for December 3rd at 8 p.m. December 3rd, the words blurred as I read them again. My story, our story, the story of invisible women everywhere, was going to be on television. I was going to be on television. For the first time in 3 years, someone other than Marcus was going to see me exactly as I was, talented, creative, and worthy of recognition. I just had to figure out how to tell him that the woman he'd been ignoring was about to become impossible to overlook. The invitation to the semi-finalist screening sat on my desk for 3 days before I found the courage to open it again. November 15th at the Chicago Theater, one of the most prestigious venues in the city. With its ornate ceiling and vintage marquee that had welcomed everyone from Frank Sinatra to modern indie bands. My documentary would be projected on that historic stage, watched by industry professionals, media critics, and an audience of strangers who had no reason to care about my invisible life. Except now, it wouldn't be invisible anymore. "You seem different lately," Marcus said over breakfast on Thursday morning, studying me with the kind of attention he usually reserved for his design projects. More, I don't know, energetic. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Different? How?" "Just different, like you have some kind of secret or something." He laughed, but there was a question buried in the sound. "You're not having an affair, are you?" The accusation was so absurd that I actually laughed a real laugh, not the careful, supportive chuckles I'd perfected over the years. "With who?" "My exciting life consists of work, home, and occasionally the grocery store." I know, it's just ... You've been staying late at the office a lot. And when you're home, you're here, but not really here, you know? Like your mind is somewhere else." He wasn't wrong. My mind was somewhere else 6 weeks in the future, imagining the broadcast, the reviews, the possibility that my story might matter to people I'd never meet. But I couldn't tell him that without explaining everything else. "Work's been intense," I said instead. "The Morrison campaign is bigger than we expected, and Jennifer's been piling on extra projects." It wasn't entirely untrue. The Morrison campaign had expanded after Sarah Morrison saw my initial pitch, and Jennifer had indeed been giving me more high-profile assignments. But those successes felt secondary to the documentary, like shadows cast by a much brighter light. That's good though, right? More responsibility usually means more money eventually. Eventually, I agreed, though money was the last thing on my mind. Recognition, respect, creative fulfillment, those were the currencies I was hungry for now. Marcus went back to scrolling through job listings, and I watched him with the strange detachment that had been growing stronger each day. He was still handsome, still charming when he wanted to be, still capable of the kind of creative insight that had attracted me in college. But he was also still waiting for success to find him, still convinced that the world owed him recognition for talent that remained largely theoretical. When had I stopped believing in his potential? When had his dreams started feeling like excuses? The realization should have devastated me, but instead it felt like waking up from a long, comfortable sleep. I wasn't angry at Marcus. Anger required investment, and I was discovering that my emotional investment in his success had been steadily declining for months. What I felt instead was a kind of gentle disappointment, the way you might feel about a movie that wasn't as good as its trailer promised. That afternoon, I met Jennifer for coffee to discuss the Morrison expansion. She'd chosen a trendy place in River North, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of spot where young professionals came to network and be seen networking. "Sarah Morrison specifically requested you for the next phase," Jennifer said, stirring sugar into her latte. "She wants to do a full rebrand, including video content and digital strategy. This could be a 6-figure project." 6 figures. The number was staggering, more than Marcus and I had ever talked about for his freelance dreams. Certainly more than he'd ever actually earned. "That's incredible." "It is. And between you and me, if you pull this off, you're looking at a promotion. Senior creative director, your own team. Real decision-making authority." Jennifer leaned forward, her expression serious. "I've been watching you for 2 years. Sarah, you have instincts that can't be taught." Vision. The Morrison pitch was unlike anything else I've seen from our team. Vision. The word hit me like a physical force. When was the last time someone had used that word to describe something I'd created? "The only question," Jennifer continued, "is whether you're ready to take on that level of responsibility. Senior director means long hours, travel, high-pressure presentations to C-suite executives. It's not a job you can phone in." "I'm ready," I said without hesitation. More than ready. And I was. For the first time in years, I was being offered an opportunity that matched my ambitions rather than asking me to shrink them. The timing felt cosmic, just as my documentary was about to broadcast, just as I was learning to make myself visible. My professional life was offering me a spotlight. That evening, I found Marcus in the living room with his laptop, working on what looked like a logo design for a local restaurant. The work was good, clean lines, clever typography, the kind of authentic aesthetic he'd been talking about for years. But it was also small, local, the kind of project that paid a few $100s rather than launching careers. "How was your day?" I asked, settling beside him on the couch. "Frustrating. I spent 3 hours on applications and got 2 more rejection emails. Apparently I'm either overqualified or underqualified, depending on who's doing the rejecting." He closed the laptop with more force than necessary. Jake thinks I should consider moving to New York. Bigger market, more opportunities. New York. The suggestion hung in the air between us like a question neither of us wanted to ask directly. Would I follow him? Would he expect me to give up my promotion, my success, my moment of visibility to support another one of his fresh starts? 6 months ago, I would have already started researching New York marketing firms, calculating the cost of moving, figuring out how to make his dream work for both of us. Now, the idea felt impossible not because I didn't love him, but because I finally loved myself too much to disappear again. What do you think? He asked. About New York? I think I said carefully that Chicago was just starting to work for me professionally. Jennifer offered me a promotion today. Senior Creative Director. His face shifted through several expressions. Surprise, pride, something that might have been concern. That's amazing, Sarah. Really amazing. When would it start? January? Probably. If I can close the Morrison expansion? And that would mean long hours travel. Real creative control over major campaigns. But also more money, right? Enough to support both of us while I figure out the next step. There it was the assumption that my success was our success, but his struggles were his alone. That my promotion was an opportunity for him to take more risks, not recognition of my individual achievements. It would mean, I said slowly, that I'd finally have the kind of career I've always wanted. The kind you've been pursuing for years. He nodded, but I could see him calculating behind his eyes how my success could enable his next attempt, his next pivot, his next explanation for why recognition continued to elude him. We went to bed without resolving anything, but the conversation had clarified something essential. Marcus still saw my career as supporting infrastructure for his ambitions, not as an independent source of meaning and identity. Even when I succeeded, I remained invisible to him as an individual rather than a partner. The next few weeks passed in a blur of Morrison meetings, documentary editing, and careful secrecy. The broadcast date, December 3rd, loomed like a deadline. For honesty, I couldn't tell Marcus about the documentary without telling him everything about the competition, about the interviews with other invisible women, about my growing understanding that our relationship was built on a foundation of unequal sacrifice, but I also couldn't let him discover it accidentally. Turning on the television to find his girlfriend's face staring back at him from a story about women who'd lost themselves in other people's dreams, the solution came from an unexpected source, my mother. You sound different on the phone, she said during our weekly check-in call. Happier. More like yourself. More like myself. How? Like the Sarah who graduated college with all those big plans? Remember, you were going to change the world through marketing, make companies tell better stories about themselves. You had such confidence back then. I did remember that version of myself, though she felt like someone I'd known a long time ago. That Sarah had believed in her own potential, had seen obstacles as challenges rather than reasons to give up. I've been working on something personal, I said. A project that matters to me. Good, you need more things that are just yours. That Marcus is a lovely boy, but he's been taking up an awful lot of space in your life. My mother had never said anything critical about Marcus before, though I'd sensed her growing concern over the years as my stories about him shifted from excited updates about his projects to careful explanations of why things weren't working. Out as planned? What do you mean? I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. I mean, you used to talk about your own work, your own ideas, your own future. Lately it's all been about what Marcus is doing, what Marcus needs, how you can help. Marcus succeed. When was the last time you talked about what you wanted? The question hit me with unexpected force. When was the last time I'd talked about what I wanted? When had I stopped having wants that weren't tied to someone else's needs? I'm working on it, I said. The project I mentioned, it's about finding yourself again after you've been invisible for too long. That sounds important. It is. And Mom, I might need you to trust me about something soon. Something that might seem crazy from the outside, but makes perfect sense to me. Honey, I've been trusting your judgment for 29 years. I'm not going to stop now? Her words gave me the courage I needed for what came next. That Saturday, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I was going to tell Marcus about the documentary, but I was going to do it in a way that gave USA a chance to change course before December 3rd. I waited until he was relaxed, settled on the couch with a beer and a design magazine, the kind of domestic quiet that had once felt comfortable but now felt charged with unspoken tension. I need to tell you something, I said, turning off the television. Something I've been working on. He looked up, immediately alert to my serious tone. Okay. What's going on? 6 weeks ago, I entered a documentary competition, Chicago Public Media's Stories That Matter. I made a film about women who support other people's dreams while putting their own ambitions on hold. His expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. You made a documentary when how? I mean, you don't know anything about filmmaking. I learned. I took equipment out, interviewed subjects, taught myself editing software. I worked on it evenings and weekends while you were out networking or sleeping in. You've been lying to me for 6 weeks? The accusation stung because it was partially true, but it also missed the larger point. I wasn't lying. I was working on something that mattered to me, something that was mine, but why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. I know about visual storytelling, composition, narrative structure, because it wasn't about you. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but they were true. For once, in 3 years, I wanted to do something that wasn't about helping you or supporting you or making your life easier. I wanted to create something that was entirely my own. Marcus set down his beer, his face cycling through hurt, confusion, and something that might have been recognition. Is this about money? Because I know I haven't been contributing financially the way I should, but things are about to turn around. I can feel it. It's not about money. It's about visibility. It's about being seen as a person with my own dreams and talents, instead of just as support staff for your ambitions. Support staff, Sarah? That's not how I see you. Then how do you see me? The question hung in the air between us, and I watched him struggle to answer. How long had it been since he'd really looked at me, really considered who I was beyond my utility in his life? You're my partner, he said finally. My girlfriend. You're the person who believes in me when no one else does. And what else? What? Do you mean, what else? I mean, what else am I besides your cheerleader and your financial support and your emotional labor provider? When you think about me, what do you see that's separate from how I serve your needs? The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. I don't think of you that way, he said weakly. You don't think of me at all, Marcus. Not as an individual. When was the last time you asked about my work? Not how much money I'm making or whether my schedule accommodates your needs, but about what I'm actually creating, what challenges I'm facing, what I'm proud of. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. We both knew he couldn't name a single project I'd worked on in the past year. Couldn't remember the last time he'd asked about my day without relating it back to his own concerns. The documentary, I continued, is being broadcast on December 3rd. On television, my story, Our Story, is going to be seen by thousands of people. Our story, about what happens when one person in a relationship becomes invisible, about the women who sacrifice their own ambitions to prop up someone else's dreams, about whether it's ever too late to reclaim yourself. Understanding dawned on his face, followed quickly by panic. You put me in it. You filmed me without permission. I filmed my own life, Marcus, which includes you, but isn't about you. You're not the villain in this story. You're not important enough to be the villain. You're just the beneficiary of a system that teaches women their value comes from how, well, they serve other people's needs. The cruelty of the words surprised me, but they felt necessary. For 3 years I'd cushioned every truth to protect his feelings, softened every criticism to preserve his ego. But softness hadn't led to change, it had led to stagnation, to a relationship where one person grew smaller so the other could feel bigger. This is insane, Sarah. You can't broadcast our private life without talking to me first. Why not? You make decisions about our life without talking to me all the time. Every time you quit a job or turn down an opportunity or decide to pivot your career in a new direction, you're making choices that affect both of us. But you never ask what I want or how your decisions impact my life. That's different. How? Is it different? Because ... He struggled for an explanation that wouldn't prove my point. Because those are practical decisions, not ... not public exposure. Everything is public exposure, Marcus. Every choice to support you instead of pursuing my own goals. Every morning I wake up early to solve your problems while mine go unaddressed. Every conversation where I listen to your frustrations while mine remain unspoken. All of that is exposure. It's just exposure to an audience of one, you. And you haven't been paying attention. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the conversation and its predictable trajectory. Marcus was hurt and defensive, which I'd expected. But he also wasn't curious about what I'd created. Wasn't interested in seeing himself through my eyes. Wasn't capable of recognizing that my documentary might be about something larger than his personal comfort. Where are you going? He asked. As I headed toward the bedroom to bed, I have work tomorrow. We need to talk about this more. About the documentary. About what it means for us. We can talk about it after you watch it. December 3rd, 8 p.m., Chicago Public Media. I'll be interested to hear what you think. I left him sitting on the couch, staring at the space where I'd been standing. For the first time in our relationship, I'd walked away from a difficult conversation instead of staying to manage his emotions and smooth over the conflict. It felt like the most radical thing I'd ever done. The next few weeks passed in a strange suspension of normal life. Marcus and I maintained the basic rhythms of cohabitation, shared meals, polite conversation, the mechanical intimacy of people who'd been together long enough that physical proximity required no emotional connection. But underneath the surface, everything had changed. He didn't ask about the documentary again, which told me everything I needed to know about his capacity for curiosity about my inner life. He also didn't congratulate me on the accomplishment, didn't express interest in seeing my work, didn't seem to understand that I'd done something remarkable regardless of its content. Instead, he threw himself into job hunting with renewed intensity. As if professional success could prove that he wasn't the person I'd described in our confrontation, he networked more aggressively, applied to positions he was overqualified for, even considered taking a part-time retail job to contribute financially while he figured out his next move. But his sudden burst of activity felt performative rather than genuine, motivated by wounded pride rather than real change. He was still waiting for someone else to recognize his talent, still convinced that success was something that would happen to him, rather than something he'd have to create for himself. Meanwhile, my professional life accelerated toward everything I'd always wanted. The Morrison expansion was approved, the promotion was confirmed, and Jennifer started including me in executive-level meetings where I sat at tables I'd only dreamed of accessing. My documentary had given me a framework for understanding my own potential. I wasn't just supporting other people's visions anymore. I was creating my own. 3 days before the broadcast, Diana Chen called with news that made my hands shake. "Sarah, I wanted to give you a heads up. Your documentary has been generating buzz in the industry. Chicago Tribune wants to do a feature interview, and I've gotten calls from 3 other media outlets asking about screenings. Whatever happens with the competition results, I think this film is going to have a life of its own." A life of its own. The phrase echoed in my head as I hung up the phone. For 3 years I'd been living someone else's life, supporting someone else's dreams, making myself small enough to fit in the margins of Marcus's ambitions. Now my work was going to have a life of its own, separate from anyone else's approval or support. That evening I told Marcus about the interviews and media attention. "That's good," he said, though his smile looked strained. "I'm happy for you. Are you?" "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? Because my success isn't your success, Marcus. It's separate from you, independent of you. It doesn't make your life easier or solve your problems or give you new opportunities. It's just mine." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Is that what you think? That I only care about your success if it benefits me? I think you don't know how to care about my success at all. I think you're so used to being the center of your own story that you can't imagine me as the center of mine." "Maybe you're right," he said, and the admission surprised us both. "Maybe I have been selfish, but I love you, Sarah. I don't want to lose you." "Then watch the documentary. Really watch it. Not just as someone who's been exposed or embarrassed, but as someone who wants to understand what I've been trying to tell you for 3 years. And if I do, if I watch it and I finally get it, then we figure out if there's still an us worth saving, or if we've both outgrown the people we were when this relationship made sense." December 3rd arrived, gray and cold, with the kind of Chicago wind that cut through winter coats and reminded you that spring was still months away. I worked a half day, left the office early, and spent the afternoon in Lincoln Park walking along the lake shore. The water was choppy and dark, waves crashing against the concrete barriers with a violence that felt appropriate to the day at 7:30. I came home to find Marcus sitting on the couch, television already tuned to Chicago public media, looking like a man about to face execution. "You don't have to watch it with me," I said. "I can go to my parents' house, or Lisa's. Give you space to process whatever you're feeling." "No," he said. "I want to watch it with you. I need to see what you see." I settled beside him, close enough that our knees almost touched but not quite. The distance felt symbolic, intimate but separate, connected but independent. At exactly 8 p.m., the program began. The opening credits of Stories That Matter rolled across our television screen in elegant white text against black, accompanied by the kind of thoughtful piano music that signaled serious documentary content. I watched Marcus's face in my peripheral vision, saw him tense as my name appeared, Invisible Architecture by Sarah Chen. Then my face filled the screen. Not the version of me that Marcus saw every day, tired, accommodating, focused on someone else's needs, but a different Sarah. Entirely. The woman in the documentary looked older, sadder, but also somehow more substantial. The camera had captured something in my eyes that I rarely allowed myself to feel in real life: anger. My name is Sarah Chen, my televised self began, and, for the past 3 years, I've been disappearing. I heard Marcus draw in a sharp breath beside me, but I kept my eyes on the screen. This was my story now, playing out in our living room but belonging to a much larger audience. The intimacy of watching it with him felt almost unbearable. The documentary moved between my personal narrative and the broader stories of women like Maria, Janet, and Rebecca. Each interview revealed another layer of invisible labor, another example of dreams deferred in service of someone else's ambitions. The editing was tighter than I'd hoped, every moment carefully chosen to build toward a larger truth about women, work, and the mathematics of sacrifice. But it was the footage of my own life that made Marcus shift uncomfortably on the couch. The camera captured him in moments he'd never intended to be filmed, complaining about rejections while I cooked dinner, scrolling through his phone while I balanced our budget, accepting my help with his portfolio as if it were his natural due rather than a gift of time and expertise. He wasn't portrayed as a villain, exactly, but as something potentially worse, a man so accustomed to receiving support that he'd become blind to it. The documentary showed him not as deliberately cruel but as unconsciously consuming, the way a plant might absorb sunlight without acknowledging the sun. The hardest part, my voice continued in voiceover as the camera showed me ironing his interview shirt at dawn, wasn't the work itself. It was the way my contributions became invisible the moment they were made, like they were just the natural order of things rather than choices I made every day. 20 minutes had never felt longer or shorter simultaneously. I watched 3 years of my life condensed into scenes that revealed patterns I'd been too close to see clearly. The woman in the documentary was competent, creative, desperately hungry for recognition that never came. She was also achingly familiar, just to me, but apparently to the women whose interviews wove through my personal story. We tell ourselves we're being supportive, Rebecca said in her kitchen, but really we're just being afraid. Afraid to want things for ourselves, afraid to risk failing at our own dreams. The camera returned to me, sitting in the same kitchen where Marcus and I had eaten thousands of meals together. I realized I wasn't just supporting his career, I was hiding behind it, using his needs as an excuse not to pursue my own ambitions, because pursuing them meant risking rejection, failure, disappointment. It was easier to sacrifice my dreams than to find out if they were worth pursuing. As the documentary moved toward its conclusion, it shifted from diagnosis to transformation. The final 10 minutes showed me working on the film itself, interviewing subjects, learning editing software, discovering capabilities I didn't know I possessed. The change was visible not just in what I was doing, but in how I moved through the world. The woman learning to use a camera held herself differently than the woman ironing shirts in the dark. The question isn't whether I wasted 3 years supporting someone else's dreams, my voice concluded as the credits began to roll. The question is whether I can spend the next 30 years supporting my own. The screen faded to black, followed by information about resources for women seeking career counseling and domestic support groups. Then silence filled our living room, heavy with everything that had just been revealed and everything that remained unsaid. Marcus stared at the blank screen for a long moment before reaching for the remote and muting the sound. When he turned to look at me, his eyes were red-rimmed and unfocused. Jesus, Sarah, what did you think? I think, ... He rubbed his face with both hands. I think I'm exactly who you said I was, and I hate it. The admission hung between us more honest than anything he'd said in months. Not defensiveness or deflection, but recognition. You're not a bad person, Marcus. You're just a person who's been so focused on your own struggles that you stopped seeing mine, but I do see you. I love you. You love the version of me that makes your life easier. The supportive girlfriend, the financial safety net, the person who believes in your potential even when you don't. But you don't see me as someone with my own potential, my own dreams worth pursuing. He was quiet for several minutes, processing. The documentary had shown him things about our relationship that he'd never had to confront directly: the disparity in emotional labor, the way my successes were framed as resources for his benefit, the gradual erosion of my individual identity. Under the weight of constant accommodation, the promotion, he said finally, at your job, you didn't seem excited when you told me about it, because you immediately started calculating how it could help your career instead of celebrating what it meant for mine and New York. When I suggested moving, ... you assumed I'd follow. You didn't ask if I wanted to leave Chicago, if moving would hurt my career, if your dreams were more important than mine. You just assumed my life was portable, in a way yours wasn't. I'm an asshole? You're someone who's never had to think about these things because they've been taken care of for you. But now you do have to think about them because I'm not going to keep taking care of them invisibly. My phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then several in rapid succession. Social media notifications, emails, friend requests from People who'd seen the documentary and wanted to share their own stories. Diana had been right about the buzz within an hour of broadcast. Invisible architecture was being discussed, shared, praised by viewers who recognized themselves in the women I'd interviewed. It's really good, Marcus said, watching me scroll through the responses. The documentary, I mean, it's devastating for me personally, but it's really good, professional quality. You have a real talent for this. The compliment felt both genuine and tragic, the first time in years he'd acknowledged my creative abilities. And it had taken a public broadcast for him to notice them. Thank you. Are you going to make more films? I don't know. Maybe. There are other stories I want to tell. Stories about us. Stories about me, about women like me, about what happens when we stop making ourselves invisible. He nodded slowly, beginning to understand that this conversation wasn't about fixing our relationship, but about acknowledging that it might be beyond repair. The documentary hadn't just revealed the problems between us. It had shown me a version of myself that existed independently of those problems. A woman with her own ambitions and the skills to pursue them. So what happens now? He asked. Now, you decide if you want to be with someone who takes up space instead of making space for you. And I decide if I want to be with someone who needs me to shrink so he can feel bigger. That's not fair, isn't it? For 3 years, I've been the smaller person in this relationship so you could be comfortable. I managed your emotional needs, supported your career, handled the practical details of our life together, all while pursuing my own ambitions only in the margins. That's not partnership, Marcus. That's employment. The word landed with the force. I'd intended employment, a transaction where one person provides service in exchange for compensation. Except in our case, the compensation had been love that felt increasingly conditional on my continued usefulness. I want to change, he said. I want to be better, to see you more clearly, to support your dreams the way you've supported mine. Do you? Or do you want things to go back to the way they were? Just with better optics? I don't know. I want those things. It was the most honest thing he'd said all evening, and it broke my heart in a way that anger couldn't. Marcus wasn't malicious, he was just limited, shaped by a world that had taught him his needs were paramount, and my job was to meet them. He could intellectually understand that this was wrong, but he couldn't fundamentally reimagine himself as someone who put equal energy into understanding and supporting my ambitions. I'm going to stay at Lisa's tonight, I said, standing up. From the couch? I need space to think. And you need space to figure out what you actually want versus what you think you should want. Sarah, wait, don't go. We can work this out, can we? Because working it out would mean rebuilding our entire relationship from scratch. It would mean you learning to see me as an equal rather than a support system. It would mean me learning to trust that you value my dreams as much as your own. And honestly, Marcus, I'm not sure either of us knows how to do that. I packed a bag while he sat on the bed, watching me fold clothes with the careful attention of someone trying to memorize a process. 3 years of shared domestic life had taught him to rely on my organizational skills, but not to learn from them. Will you come back tomorrow? I'll come back to get more of my things. We need to talk about practical stuff, the lease, our shared accounts, how to separate our lives in a way that's fair to both of us. You're leaving me. I'm choosing myself. For the first time in 3 years, I'm choosing to prioritize my own needs, my own growth, my own potential. If that feels like abandonment to you, it's because you've gotten used to me abandoning myself. I kissed his forehead gently, a gesture that felt both intimate and final. Watch the documentary again tomorrow. Not as someone who's been criticized, but as someone who wants to understand, really try to see what I was trying to show you. Lisa lived in Wicker Park in a converted loft that felt more like an art installation than an apartment. She'd been my roommate's senior year of college before I'd moved in with Marcus, and she'd maintained the kind of independent creative life I'd once imagined for myself. Her work as a freelance photographer had taken her all over the world, documenting stories that mattered to her rather than stories that paid the most. I saw it, she said when she opened the door, pulling me into a hug that smelled like darkroom chemicals and expensive coffee. The documentary. Holy shit, Sarah, I had no idea things were that bad with Marcus. They weren't bad. Exactly. They were just ... small. I made myself small so he could feel big, and after a while, small started feeling normal. Well, you're not small anymore. That film was fucking powerful. My phone's been buzzing all night with people asking if I know you, wanting to share their own stories about invisible labor and deferred dreams. She made tea while I unpacked my overnight bag, and we sat on her couch talking until nearly 2 a.m. Lisa had never particularly liked Marcus, not because he was terrible, but because she'd watched me change in his presence, becoming more cautious, less ambitious, more focused on managing his needs than pursuing my own interests. The thing is, she said, curled up in an oversized armchair with her tea mug cradled in both hands. You were never invisible to the rest of us. Your friends, your family, your colleagues, we all saw how talented and creative and capable you were. Marcus was the only one who couldn't see it, because seeing it would have required him to acknowledge what he was asking you to sacrifice, but I chose to sacrifice it. No one forced me to give up my ambitions. Did you choose it, though? Or did you just accept that it was the price of being loved by someone who couldn't love you without diminishing you? The question kept me awake long after Lisa went to bed. Had I chosen to support Marcus, or had I simply been too afraid of his disapproval to do anything else? How much of my self-sacrifice had been generous love, and how much had been cowardice, disguised as virtue? The next morning brought a flood of messages that made the answer clearer. Emails from women who'd seen the documentary and recognized their own lives in my story. Requests for interviews from journalists writing about invisible labor and relationship dynamics, an invitation to speak at a conference about women's economic empowerment. 3 film festivals wanted to screen Invisible Architecture, and a production company in Los Angeles was interested in discussing a series based on similar themes. For the first time in my adult life, I was being seen as Sarah Chen, the filmmaker, the storyteller, the woman with something important to say, not as Marcus's girlfriend, or someone's employee, or anybody's support system. The recognition felt overwhelming and necessary in equal measure. Went back to the apartment that afternoon to find Marcus exactly where I'd left him, still in yesterday's clothes, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the detritus of a sleepless night. The television was still tuned to Chicago Public Media, as if he'd been hoping the documentary would come on again. "Did you watch it again?" I asked, 3 times. His voice was hoarse, exhausted. Each time I saw more things I'd missed, more ways I'd been thoughtless, selfish, blind. And I understand why you're leaving me. I understand why you have to. The admission surprised me with its clarity. I'd expected him to fight harder, to make promises about change, to try to negotiate a different outcome. Instead, he seemed to have arrived at the same conclusion I'd been circling for weeks, that our relationship had been built on a foundation too unequal to support the people we were becoming. "I don't want to hurt you, Marcus. You're not hurting me. You're just not protecting me anymore. From consequences, from reality, from having to figure out my own life without using you as a safety net." He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "That's not the same thing as hurting me, even though it feels like it right now." We spent the next hour working out practical details with the kind of careful politeness reserved for strangers who would stay in the apartment until the lease expired in March. How to divide our shared possessions, mostly books and kitchen equipment. Nothing that felt worth fighting over. What to do about the money I'd lent him over the years. Nothing calling. A gift felt cleaner than trying to calculate payback. "Your parents are going to hate me," he said as we divided up photo albums. "They'll be disappointed, but they've been worried about me for months. My mom said I'd stop sounding like myself when we talked." "You did stop sounding like yourself. You started sounding like someone whose job was to make me feel better about my failures." It was a devastatingly accurate assessment, and it came from him without prompting or accusation from me. The documentary had given him a mirror he couldn't look away from, and he was finally seeing himself as I'd seen him for months. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Figure out how to live without someone managing my life for me, I guess. Get a job that pays bills instead of holding out for the perfect creative opportunity. Learn to iron my own shirts." He smiled ruefully. "Grow up, basically. At 32, it's embarrassing how much growing up I still have to do." "It's not embarrassing. It's just late. What about you?" "Besides becoming a famous documentary filmmaker, I don't know about famous, but I want to tell more stories about women who've made themselves invisible. Apparently there are a lot of us out there, and we're ready to be seen." That evening, I moved the rest of my things to Lisa's apartment. It felt like emerging from a cave I'd been living in for so long that I'd forgotten what sunlight looked like. Everything was brighter, sharper, more vivid than I remembered. Colors seemed more saturated. Possibilities felt more real. My own reflection looked more familiar. 3 weeks later, Diana Chen called with news that changed everything. "Sarah, are you sitting down because I have some incredible news?" I was actually standing in Lisa's kitchen making coffee before another day of interviews and meetings that had become my new normal since the broadcast. "I'm ready. You won. Invisible Architecture won the Stories That Matter competition." The judges were unanimous. They said it was the most powerful and important documentary they'd seen in years. "The $10,000 grant is yours, plus broadcast rights in 12 other markets, plus and this is the big one, Chicago Public Media wants to commission a series based on your concept." The phone slipped in my hand, nearly clattering to the floor. A series. 6 episodes, each profiling different aspects of invisible labor in American society. full creative control, your own production budget, opportunity to hire a small team. Sarah, this is huge. This could launch a real career in documentary filmmaking. After I hung up, I sat in Lisa's living room staring at my hands, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. 6 months ago, I'd been waking up at 5:30 a.m. to manage someone else's career while my own ambitions gathered dust. Now I was being offered the chance to turn my personal revelation into a professional calling. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the news online. Congratulations, you deserve this more than anyone. It was the first time he'd contacted me since I'd moved out, and the message felt like a gift recognition without strings attached. Celebration without expectation of reciprocity. Maybe he was learning to see me clearly after all, even if it was too late for us. I texted back, "Thank you. I hope you're taking care of yourself." His response came immediately. "I am." Finally. That night I called my parents to share the news. My mother cried not from sadness, but from relief and pride, and the particular joy that comes from watching someone you love find their way back to themselves. "I knew you had it in you," she said. "I just wasn't sure you knew." 6 months later, I stood in the same Chicago theater where I'd first watched Invisible Architecture with an audience of strangers. This time, I was on stage accepting an award for the documentary series that had grown from that first film. The series had been broadcast nationally, had sparked conversations about invisible labor in universities and workplaces across the country, had given voice to thousands of women who'd recognized their own experiences in the stories I'd told in the audience. I spotted Lisa beaming with pride. My parents had flown in from Phoenix for the ceremony. Jennifer from work sat in the third row, having become one of my biggest champions as I balanced the series production with my promotion to senior creative director. Marcus wasn't there, which felt appropriate rather than painful. We'd seen each other briefly a few weeks earlier when he'd come to pick up the last of his things from storage. He'd gotten a steady job at a small design firm. Nothing glamorous, but something that paid his bills and gave him the stability to pursue personal projects on his own time. He looked healthier, more grounded, like someone who'd learned to carry his own weight. "I'm proud of you," he'd said as we stood in the storage facility parking lot. "Not just for the success, but for having the courage to choose yourself. I don't think I could have done what you did." "You could," I'd replied. "You just would have done it differently." Now, standing on the stage with applause washing over me, I thought about visibility and recognition and the long journey from invisible to seen. The woman who'd entered that first competition had been desperate for acknowledgement, hungry for someone to notice her talents and ambitions. The woman accepting this award had learned something more valuable: how to see herself clearly, how to value her own work, how to demand the space she needed to grow. The applause died down and I stepped up to the microphone. 6 months ago, I was invisible in my own life. I'd made myself so small, so accommodating, so focused on supporting other people's dreams that I'd forgotten I had dreams of my own, worth pursuing. The audience was quiet, attentive. In the darkness beyond the stage lights, I could feel hundreds of people leaning forward, recognizing something of themselves in my story. This award isn't just mine, it belongs to every woman who's ever made herself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Every woman who's managed the invisible labor that keeps families and workplaces and communities functioning while her own contributions go unnoticed. Every woman who's deferred her dreams until someday, and then watched someday never come. I paused, looking out at faces I couldn't quite see but could feel listening. The most radical thing we can do is make ourselves visible, not by changing who we are, but by refusing to hide who we've always been, by claiming space instead of making space, by supporting our own dreams with the same energy we've given to everyone else's. More applause, but I wasn't finished. To the women watching, this who recognize themselves in these stories: you are not invisible. You never were. You were just waiting for permission to be seen. Consider this your permission. Consider this your invitation to step into the light you've been creating for everyone else. As I left the stage, award in hand, I thought about the woman who'd stood in her kitchen 6 months earlier, filming herself in secret while her boyfriend slept. She'd been afraid of failure, of success, of discovery, of remaining hidden forever. But she'd been brave enough to point a camera at her own life and ask the hardest question of all: who am I when no one else is watching? The answer, it turned out, was someone worth watching, someone worth celebrating, someone who'd been visible all along, just waiting for the right light to shine.